Hey everyone, it's Madame Berry. Today we're working on this illustration using Copic markers and colored pencils. The portrait reference that I'm using was actually part of a reference pack that I bought that I've linked in this thread on Twitter. I'll have the link for this thread and the specific reference in the description. But I went and I mashed that up with this honeycomb texture that I thought created a really neat abstract composition. Now I mentioned I'm using Copic markers and colored pencils. Really, it's mostly just the Copic markers. The colored pencils were brought in at the very end to bring all of the details together cleanly. I haven't used Copic markers for an illustration in years, probably. I can't actually remember when the last time I used Copics for more than just a sketch was. I sketch with them all the time because they're really great for laying down blocks of color, or if you have the grayscale tones, just like shading in blocks of shade really quickly. But I haven't illustrated with them. I haven't like fully rendered something with them in so long. But I just had the itch to try doing something with Copics and colored pencils. The idea that I had to integrate the colored pencils was actually much different than the way I ended up utilizing them. I had this idea of adding lots of texture and striations using the colored pencils, but when I started working on this illustration, I realized that this probably wasn't the composition to try that with. There's just too much going on with the honeycombs already. So maybe in the future we'll see something different with the colored pencils. I've been watching a lot of Chris Hong here on YouTube, and she's been experimenting a lot with her art lately, and I love the way that she adds so much texture when she adds colored pencils into her process, and the way that she uses colored pencils that aren't necessarily the color you'd think you might use in an area, and it just brings out this incredible depth of color. And that's something that I've been kind of wanting to try to integrate into my own artwork. I don't think I did that here, but that's fine. I still had fun. But what I wanted to talk about in this video is, if you haven't noticed from the past couple of videos on my channel, I jump around in medium a whole lot. Gouache is always something that I go back to, and I'm actually working on another gouache painting right now, so stay tuned and make sure you've hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when that gets uploaded. But even though I have a main staple with gouache, I have trouble sticking to only one thing, and I think that's totally okay. So some of the reasons that I jump around so much with regards to what medium I'm using, for one, I'm a curious person. I see an art supply and I go, ooh, I wonder how that works. Like, even right now, I have an Amazon wish list full of stuff I want to try but will probably never get to try because there's no reason for me to own that many art supplies. Or like, I'll see a YouTube video where somebody uses something and I'm like, oh, I want to try that. I've been watching a lot of mural artists lately and I'm like, ooh, mural art sounds interesting. I can't not fantasize almost about what it would be like to make art with a particular medium that I haven't used yet. I'm just so innately curious about all of it. A while back, I had used this glow-in-the-dark paper that was handmade by Dodgy Paper Company. And the way that I discovered that paper was through a YouTube video. It was through Zeke's Lunchbox, where she was working on some recycled paper for a gallery show. And so I got curious about that paper myself, and I looked through their website and saw the glow-in-the-dark paper, which I now love and I want more of because I'm out, but I never would have used it or discovered it for myself if I hadn't followed through on my own curiosity. I also like to experiment. I like to think about how I can integrate other techniques into my own art style. I mentioned with Chris Hong, there's aspects of her art that I don't want to copy her art, but there's techniques that she uses that I think would be interesting to experiment with integrating into what I do and making my own version of it. When you're looking at somebody's artwork and you're like, oh, I wish I could make art like them, think about what it is that you like about their artwork and what it is that you want to make yours. Because I guarantee you don't just want to copy their style. There's something about their artwork that you can pick out that you like specifically, whether it's the way that they draw eyes, or the way that they render 3D forms, or the way that they use color. So when I have this artist that I'm looking at that uses colored pencils in this really interesting way that I have found that I really like the end result of, it makes me wonder how I can take that information and utilize it in a way that benefits my own artwork, rather than just copying it verbatim, basically. It's also beneficial to experiment with different ways of working with a particular medium. For instance, I never liked acrylics, but when I bought this thing called a Stay Wet palette, which is supposed to keep your paint wet for hours or even days on end, I realized that what I don't like about acrylics is the fact that they dry too fast, and when I solve that problem, I actually really like working with acrylics. So now I have this new medium that I really enjoy working in a particular way that I never would have realized I liked unless I experimented with it and found a new way to make it work for me. Which leads me into my next point, is that I'm always learning. Using a new art medium can help inform techniques about the art mediums that I'm currently already using. Especially when it comes to either mixing media or just experimenting with color in a way in one medium, and then you have this idea of like, oh, that might also work in the medium that I use currently. Like when I was experimenting with oil paints, I actually found that the way that oil paints mix with each other is actually quite similar to the way that gouache tends to mix with each other. When you use oil paints wet on wet, they blend very easily. And with gouache, since it reactivates itself, it's almost like you're always painting wet on wet. So to have these really two similarly textured mediums in the way that they're like very smooth and buttery, I can utilize my knowledge that I've learned painting with oils and take that into the way that I work with color when I'm painting with gouache. Or, and I keep going back to this because it's on the forefront of my mind, but the way that Chris Hong works with colors with colored pencil, that's something that I can also take into my gouache paintings too, where I can put underpaintings of different colors in, or add details in the highlights or the shadows using colors that you might not think to put in the highlight or put in the shadow, that just add this extra dimension to the artwork. But when you're working in a new medium, it kind of shifts your frame of mind, and it opens up to the possibility of learning something that you might not have thought to think about. That makes sense. But you might not have considered it when you were working with the medium that you're comfortable with, because you're in your comfort zone. You're just in the zone. And so taking yourself out of that comfort zone and putting yourself in a new medium lets you think about things in a new way. So you might be more open to learning something new. This next reason why I jump around might be the least acceptable reason, but also the most prominent reason, which is I just get bored. I have such a hard time sticking to one thing consistently, and that goes for almost all aspects of my life. Like, I'll pick up a hobby, and I'll stick with it for about a month, and then I'll drop it. Like, I, at one point, embroidered. Do I do that now? Nope. But it was fun while it lasted. But even though I will always keep going back to gouache as my main medium because I love the way it works, even though that will always be my mainstay. Sometimes I'm like, I cannot do another freaking gouache painting right now. I will lose my mind. So I just need to do something else because I'm bored. And it's so easy to get into a rut and then to lose your motivation and lose your will to continue working creatively. And sometimes you just need to, do something else. Sometimes you just need to shake things up a bit so that you can get out of that rut. This is actually one of the things that I talk about in the final chapter of my creative productivity workbook, where when you're having so much trouble sitting down and getting yourself ready to work on something and it just feels like a drag the entire time, when the going gets tough, one of the things that you can do is just take a break from the thing that you're doing for a little while. Take a break from gouache painting, in my case, for a little while and do something else. It's totally fine. By the way, if you're interested in that workbook, I'll have a link in the description where you can read the first chapter and get the first worksheet for free. Lastly, the reason that I jump around so much with different mediums is that I find it fun. I get bored with one medium and I find doing something different fun sometimes. I don't see why I should have to restrict myself to one thing just because that's what I've labeled my artistic niche as. I can create a body of work in a main medium or a main style and still have fun experimenting with others. And heck, I might find something new that I like while I'm at it. That's actually how I came to painting with gouache, was I started painting with watercolors and I liked it, but I was having a bit of trouble with it. And on a whim, for my birthday at one point, I had asked for a set of gouache and a palette to put the gouache in, and I thought it was just going to be something fun to experiment with, but it ended up being my mainstay medium. I think a lot of people who subscribe to this channel came to it for the Clip Studio Paint video. And it's interesting because I don't really consider myself a traditional artist or a digital artist. Most of the time I work traditional, but I do very often work digitally. And I'm a little bit worried that the wide variety of mediums on this channel might turn people off, the inconsistency might turn people off. But I think I just have to embrace the fact that that's part of who I am. And even if something that I try on this channel might not be part of what I do consistently, I think it's still something that people can learn from and that I can learn from too. If you're interested in this illustration, the original will be in my shop in the description. Anyway, if you liked this video, please make sure to hit the thumbs up button and the subscribe button. And watch me experiment with more cool art mediums in this video over here, where I try out these glow-in-the-dark oil paints. They're super cool. Until next time, take care.